Welcome to the Applying to Graduate School in the Humanities and Social Sciences panel. This is a conversation that is part of the 2021 Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series. We are happy to have you join us and look forward to answering your questions and giving you information about applying to graduate programs. I'm Dr. Will Whittles. I'm the Assistant Director of Academic Affairs at the Graduate School at Brown University, and I was formerly a Program Manager with the Leadership Alliance. I'm excited to be back with you all. I will be the moderator for today's event. It's my sincere pleasure to share this time today with today's panelists. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Renita Miller.
Hi, everyone. I'm Renita Miller, and I'm the Associate Dean of Access, Diversity, and Inclusion in the Graduate School at Princeton. I also serve as a lecturer in the Politics Department, as well as the Executive Director for the Presidential Predoctoral Fellowship Program. I am happy to be with you today, and I think I'm just going to quickly say a few things about Princeton, which is that we are home to over 2,700 graduate students. We offer advanced degrees for 42 academic departments. Every student who is accepted into a PhD program at Princeton is guaranteed full funding, tuition fees, and stipend for all years of regular program enrollment. And over 70% of our enrolled graduate students live in campus housing. Our team, the Access, Diversity, and Inclusion team, we have wonderful programs to support students from the Predoctoral Fellowship Initiative, which is a one-year fully funded fellowship that includes an offer of regular admission to the sponsoring doctoral program the following year. We have the Graduate Scholars Program, which is a cohort-based program for first-year students from diverse backgrounds. We also have our Diversity Fellows Program, which are advanced graduate students that put together these amazing programs for students. And then we have a ton of affinity groups and centers to help students. And so, and then just lastly, I just want to note that any students that participate in Leadership Alliance and Leadership Alliance professional development sessions like today will receive an application fee waiver. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Patricia Ray, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Patricia Ray, and I am at the University of Pennsylvania in the Grad School of Arts and Sciences. And I'm the Associate Director of Admissions for our programs. And Dr. Miller stole all my thunder. She got to say everything I was going to say. All of
even better, Pat, even better.
Whatever she said.
I know. There you go.
Yes, all of our PhD programs are fully funded as well. We offer PhD and master's programs. We're in Philadelphia. We're not very far from Princeton. We actually have an exchange scholar program with Princeton and some of the other schools on the East Coast that we our students visit there. They visit with us. So, and we are in a major city, not quite as dramatic as New York. It's a little more toned down, but it's a vibrant city, lots of good food and lots of places to go. And I look forward to talking to each one of you and finding out how we can get you to apply to graduate school. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Pat. I'd like now to invite Ms. Shemalor Shobande to introduce herself.
Hi, you guys. I'm Shemalor Shobande. I am not a PhD yet, hopefully, and I am a PhD student in the English department here at Brown University. I'm going into my third year in the program. I got my BA at Stanford in comparative literature and African American studies. So if you guys have any questions about what it's like to switch departments, you can let me know. And I'm just here to be part of Leadership Alliance. I know some of you because I think some of you are my students. And I'm also really excited to be a part of this as I was a Leadership Alliance Mellon Initiative Fellow in 2018 at Columbia University.
Thanks, Shemalor. And finally, I'm pleased to let Dr. Natalie Strobik introduce herself.
Dr. Miller kind of put us all to shame, so I'm going to try to follow up. I'm Natalie Strobik, the Assistant Dean of Undergraduate Research at Johns Hopkins University, and we're kind of okay. So we have a lot of different graduate programs in the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences that span the arts and humanities. We also have, some of you might go into business. We have the Carey Business School, the School of Advanced International Studies, the School of Education, and of course we have a hospital that some people have heard of. So I'll put a link to a list of our programs in chat, but we also are going to offer fee waivers to anyone who's in the Leadership Alliance, and our graduate programs in the Humanities and Social Sciences are fully funded as well. So I can't wait to hear your questions today, and thank you for giving me some time. And I also have a PhD in comparative literature, so I'm also deeply into the humanities.
A huge thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. The Leadership Alliance appreciates your time and your wisdom. And I'm looking forward to jumping into some student questions. I'm going to start off with one that came in before the panel. And I'm going to ask Dr. Miller to answer first, since she did her homework, unlike me. So what are there any particularly common mistakes to take note of on an application or the application process?
That's a really great question. So one, I won't say mistakes, but I will say we often receive quite a few questions about this, which is who needs to write your letters of recommendation. And I'm just going to tackle this, and then this allows my esteemed panelists to engage and offer other advice. But as it relates to the letters of recommendation, I would say, we often get the question of, like, can a postdoc write my letter, or someone that I worked for, in an internship, or a non-faculty member. And so my response often is, yes, the other people can write your letters. However, we highly recommend that a faculty member that is familiar with your academic record, that is familiar with your research experience, that can speak directly to your research experience and how it has helped you, and how much you have contributed, to learning about the research process, I would say is a more formidable letter of recommendation. So just want to say, get really great, strong letters from faculty. As it relates to your application, they hold a lot of weight.
Does anybody else want to jump in? If not, I can pose another question.
Can you just give her all the questions? She's aces.
Well, you did think of the fee waiver, Dr. Strobik. That was good. I thought, oh, that's right. I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
I stole it from her.
Did you say that too? Oh my goodness.
Well, so I'll go on to the next question. And I just lost it. Give me a moment to find it again. Yeah, this is a process question, and I feel like it's really important because now is a very good time to be researching programs. And so this question is, how do we start researching programs to determine a good fit? Natalie, I'll put you on the spot.
So that's a great question. I wish I could find it. I'll try to find it while we're here, but I always have students that I'm working with start with a spreadsheet where they fill out 3 people they think they could work with at every institution they want to apply to. And if you can't find 2 or 3 people that would fit to be advisors for you, or labs that you would fit in, the school is probably not a great fit for what you want to do. So, I'll say that to students, like if you want to go and work on phage research, Johns Hopkins may not be the best place. We have one lab for it that's not been very active, for example. So that's kind of the best test for fit, is if you can actually find people that you would really love to be with for 5 or 6 years. And you're also going to want to put that in your statement of purpose and help that committee understand where you're seeing the fit for yourself in that program. So that's my biggest advice, is start trying to filter, because I know it's hard sometimes with the big names to figure out where you fit, but a big name might not necessarily be the best place where that type of research is happening. So, if you wanted to do something in maybe Indigenous studies, maybe it's a school out in California or the Southwest might have the best. So start trying to find those mentors, those faculty at schools you're interested in, who are just dream people that you'd love to pick the brain of. And that's where I would begin. I hope that helps.
This is a two-part question, and I'm going to put Shemalor and Pat on the spot. And the two-part question is, Shemalor, did you reach out to faculty as you were choosing a graduate school and applying? And Pat, can that make an applicant more competitive?
Reaching out.
Reaching out to faculty.
Yeah, I mean, I strongly suggest that, because just to piggyback on what Natalie said, I mean, in addition to finding people that you would like to work with, you also want to make sure that you can get along with them and what kind of a person they are. Like she said, you're going to be committing to 5 to 6 years of a program that, you hope to stay through and finish, so you want to make sure that there's a good connection there and someone that's accessible. And you may not find that out immediately in the beginning, but it'll at least give you a feel for, this is somebody that I could really work with for the long term, I think it does make your application stronger. I just spoke to my group yesterday, and this was one of the things that I suggested to them, that then someone is in the program that knows you and can advocate for you. They can use you as a reference, and then, their colleagues will say, do you know this student? They put you down as a reference, or that they've worked with you, or they've been speaking to you, and then they can advocate for you in the admissions process. I think that it's always good to try to reach out.
Yeah, at least for me, I can say I actually fairly sure I contacted everyone I put on my statements of purpose. So if I put someone's name down as interested in working with them, I cold emailed them, which was very intimidating at first, but at the same time, I think in a lot of respects, faculty don't expect you to necessarily know them before you email them. So usually I would just write a short email that was like, this is who I am, this is what I'm interested in researching. And what really helped, I found, was highlighting a publication that they had done that represented the kind of research that I wanted to interact with them about or discuss with them about. So actually my current mentor, Professor Kwashi, I remember I wrote him an email that essentially said, hi, me and Ms. Shimolare, this is what I do. I do Black Atlantic literature and Black feminisms. I noticed you wrote this book on Black women's subjectivity. Would you be able to talk with me about Brown and also about your research? And usually people are really receptive to that sort of thing. I want to say I applied to 8 schools. I heard back from at least one person at all of them, and it is a really good indication of whether you want to work with somebody. I remember Brown wasn't necessarily my top choice when I was initially applying, but after talking with Kevin, I was like, oh my gosh, this is someone I really, really want to work with. This is someone who I can already tell is really kind and interested in all of the questions that I have. And often you kind of get a better sense for who is considered a really good mentor, as opposed to who's necessarily considered a big name. So working with this person who actually has worked with a lot of the quote unquote big names in the field, and who unbeknownst to me is actually quite a big name in the field, was really helpful, just that process of cold emailing. So it was my least favorite part by far, but definitely I would say an essential part of the application, and confirms that fit piece, because faculty will tell you very bluntly, like, oh, I wrote that book in 2008. I am not interested in that anymore. Or, oh, I'm leaving this institution, which is another thing you will really, really want to know if they like, they're moving, you're applying to like UC Riverside and they're like, oh, I'm moving to NYU. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, then if you really want to work with them, maybe don't apply to UC Riverside. So that kind of information was super helpful for me.
I just really, oh, go, Natalie.
No,
go ahead.
well, go
No,
ahead.
no, you got it.
I just wanted to say, if you guys are all so lucky to be doing research this summer, because you can get a jump start on these emails. Because I will say, I think faculty are very, very overwhelmed in September when everyone decides they're applying in emails. And if you could send your emails out in July, I really think that's prime time. They might be checking email lists frequently, but they're probably getting 80% fewer emails. So please, yeah, if as was mentioned, if you could reference a publication of theirs and let them know why you're interested. Please don't email them and ask them to sort of sell you the program. That's a big mistake I see. So, dear Professor so-and-so, can you tell me, why I would be great for, the program at Princeton in Africana Studies? That's not what they're looking for. And they're going to get a lot of generic emails like that. But if you said, I'm really interested in your work in this, like that article, and I want to do this type of work, could we discuss that more, or how our research might fit together? That's really fantastic. But generally, the summer is going to be better, because the fall is when every one of your peers realizes for the first time they want to go to graduate school. Sorry, Will.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to say, I thought that and this also applies to the way that you described it, Natalie Miller, the email that you described writing was beautiful. In its simplicity, hi, my name is, I'm applying to graduate school. I read this book of yours, or I read this article of yours. It coincides with a lot of my interests. Do you have time to talk a little bit more about research and mentoring in the department? That's great. We've seen a lot of emails that are either too general, can you tell me more about your program, which is going to frustrate the faculty, or are too specific, like you give an entire biography. So really modeling it on the email that Miller described is the right way to do it. Because it doesn't come across like you're trying to impress them. It doesn't come across like you haven't been doing your homework. You've read their book, you're interested in it, and I think that. So I really just wanted to amplify what my esteemed panelists have said. Is there anybody else who wanted to jump in on this piece?
That covers it.
So how do you go about weighing lots of different factors? So potential research mentor versus the city you want to live in for 5, 6, 7 years versus the overall culture of the university. These are all very different factors. How would you suggest students weigh these competing factors? I guess we'll kick it back to Renita.
Yeah, so it's interesting, because this is a conversation you can, as an administrator, we're often sharing with students about why our institution is amazing. But at the end of the day, when I feel like they should, after they've done all of their research and they have found an institution that checks a lot of the boxes, they need to visit campus. They need to get a feel for the institution and the culture. And that's really the only way to do that. Unfortunately, that was a little tricky this past year, but I think we are sort of moving now into more normal conditions. And I would say the best source of information and truth about an institution is the graduate students. They will be honest with prospective students about their experience, about the culture of the department, about what you know, what they have experienced thus far. Now, of course, you also still have to take into account that as an individual's experience, but if you are hearing the same constant, maybe negative narrative about a specific department, that's something to take heed to. But you also have to form your own opinion. So that's what I would say. Anybody else has anything to add to that? Please feel free to jump in.
Oh, I would say in terms of choosing recently, just in terms of like being the least sentimental possible, the first thing was research mentors. This is particularly important, in my opinion, just for my research, because I do a lot of interdisciplinary work, and I do, like pretty much a lot of the students here, I do work that's concerned with like questions of race, ethnicity, and gender. And often, like if you don't have a research mentor who's familiar with those topics, it can get kind of complicated. So first of all was like being able to do, would I be able to do the research I would want to do? Second was livability in terms of like the city, but also in terms of the stipend, which is like, I feel like kind of something that people often don't want to talk about, but there's a lot of situations, luckily not at Brown or I think at any of the institutions we attend, but like at serious institutions where I think stipends are a serious problem to the extent where people are hindered from doing their research for them. And so I know people who like have given up dream schools because it's just not a livable area, which sounds awful, but you also have to think that you actually have to like survive. Um, and so those are the two I think must-haves. And then for the others, I think were more negotiables. So like I would have loved to, I think it would have been cool to live in a big city like Philadelphia, for instance, but I also still like Providence. So those were the ways that I chose where to apply to, which I think is the first hurdle. And then once you get kind of feedback back, then other things like, is this a good place? Like, do I like the city or do I like the suburbs more, can kind of come into play. But those were the two main kind of pieces that I chose for myself, at least.
I think those are really, really great. And I just want to highlight Shimalari's point about cost of living, because it is important to understand, you know, what the stipend is and how much it costs to live in that particular area. I know, for instance, Palo Alto is very expensive. I love my Stanford people, but I do think that they have a great stipend. But it's just a great example in California of how much the cost of living is. They have graduate housing, so I'm not disparaging Stanford. I'm just saying it's just something to account for when you're thinking of your experience. And I also really want to highlight, because I think you've continued to make this point, and I think it's one that is the most important point about the faculty and who will you be working with. And if there are multiple people, multiple professors in the department that share your research interests. And you should try to find departments that have multiple people. Now, depending on your field, that may be more difficult to do. If you have one person, great, and that person seems like it's going to be a good fit for you, wonderful, but it's better to have multiple faculty members in the department that you think could be potential faculty mentors, but also keeping in mind that people change their their research agenda after they've begun graduate school, because you're going to go through a series of courses and your interests may change. You may find that you're really fascinated by something completely different from what you were interested in when you came in. So it's also important to keep an open mind as it relates to your research interests, your research agenda. But just look for departments that have at least 2 to 3 faculty members that could be a good fit for you and your interests.
One quick piece to follow up on funding. Also take a look at not just the total amount relative to the cost of living, but how the school supports you during the summer. So the number that they're going to give you in the offer letter is usually the quote for the academic year. It may not cover what support you get in the summer. So when I went to graduate school, there was zero. You had to figure something out from nothing. But for example, at Brown, we're able to guarantee now at least the academic year rate for the 3 months of the summer. Nothing else contingent upon that, other than maybe your teaching responsibilities or our responsibilities that come along with that. I would have much rather had that, because your summer is when you're going to make a lot of progress towards your milestones, whether it's studying for your prelims, writing a field paper, or working on your dissertation. So if you can find a place that gives you support, no strings attached to do that, versus a place that's going to make you teach the entire summer where you can't do anything else, that should factor into your consideration. Now, teaching during the summer is a great thing to do because it allows you to build up your teaching skills, but you want to be able to at least be able to opt into it versus not. Natalie, I think you, unmuted.
Yeah, this kind of speaks to what you're saying, but look really comprehensively at what that school is offering. Like Dr. Miller brought up, you might see a school that has graduate student housing. That can be very important. Like Hopkins, for example, we're A-OK, but we do not have graduate student housing. That might be an issue. I did my PhD at University of California, Davis. They have not only graduate student housing, but graduate family housing with playgrounds and things like that. They give graduate students daycare funding as well. So you might, depending on where you're at in your life, want to look at some of those benefits. Some schools will give students the health insurance that undergraduates give. Some schools will give graduate students the health insurance that staff and faculty get. So you need to make possible considerations based on that as well. But my main advice, like the number one advice I will give, is apply, especially as a Leadership Alliance student. You probably will have many waivers to many schools. Apply, and when you have offers in front of you, then fully evaluate. But I'm amazed at the number of students that will sort of eliminate options early on because of those things when they shouldn't. And I have had students, who got accepted to Stanford, in great programs, but also somewhere else with less of a stipend, and they were able to negotiate a little bit because maybe they had a fellowship elsewhere. So my number one advice to you is you are possibly not the best person to evaluate if you are a great fit for a PhD program, because we're a little hard on ourselves sometimes. And I would just apply and let that committee help make that decision. And when you have those offers in front of you, then look at the money, then use the cost of living calculator, then look at the benefits and other things they offer.
That's where your spreadsheet comes into play, that you had suggested right from the beginning.
I'm looking
Then
for
it's
it.
all right there, and you can look at it and really think about where you're moving. Where can I live and survive for the next 5 years? I'm a big advocate for the spreadsheet. That's a great idea.
It's great.
It's all right there.
Yeah, I'm looking. Okay.
Are you looking for an example of a spreadsheet?
I have like a particular one I use, and I just had someone updating it, but it has like put 3 faculty you could work with, who are your letter writers, like all the things you'll need for the application thing. So
my spreadsheet doesn't have letter writers, so
yeah, this has everything. I'm gonna find it in just a minute. I gotta stop answering the Q&A questions, but I'll find it.
So I'm seeing in the Q&A coming in some questions, how you go about finding out some of this financial information or benefits information, or do you only hear after the offer? This is where talking to current graduate students is going to be really advantageous to you. And in general, current graduate students are forthcoming about what the program is like, especially versus what people say, right? What the university might say and what the facts might be on the ground. So that's a good opportunity to get that insider info. Is the stipend large enough? What do students typically do over the summer? Where's the housing? A lot of that kind of livability questions can be answered well by graduate students who are currently in that program. So another question that came in before the panel, what makes for a strong writing sample when applying for a program in the humanities or social sciences? Eeny, meeny, Pat.
Now I'm stuck on this Q&A box. What makes for a strong application, did you say, or a personal statement?
Writing sample.
Writing sample. Okay, so the writing sample is really where you want to show what you, where your interests lie and how best to represent what you've been working on for the last few years.
We might have lost Pat. Does anybody else want to jump in?
So, I mean, that writing sample, it should show the depth of your analytic ability. So it's usually going to be a little bit more extensive than maybe a term paper. It hopefully will show some of the training that you might be using in that graduate program. Again, even though you should have some flexibility and things will change in the first 2 years of that PhD program usually. But if it could show, for example, that you know certain major figures in the discipline, that would be a great choice for a writing sample. If you, you know, it should be something that you've had multiple advisors at your school take a look at. I wrote it with one specific research mentor, but I shared it with a couple others as an undergrad to get feedback. So I definitely recommend that. And just, you generally, I think it floats to the top when you think of the work you've done. I feel like a lot of students generally have something in mind that they want to use and might need to abbreviate that or alter that for different projects, but it usually is a little bit more clear.
I will say an idea is to use the research you're doing for LAME. At least that's what I did. It was really useful to just kind of, for the Columbia program, for my program, they actually made us write a paper. So a lot of it was transferring that material to a writing sample. But also I feel like, especially for the humanities, I don't know if this is true for the social sciences, but for the humanities, you don't often get the opportunity to kind of work long term on a project like this. So using something from LAME or even something from your senior or honors thesis, if you're writing one of those, I feel like has generally been the advice I've gotten. Since you have more time, you have time to read more widely than you would for a term paper, especially if you're on quarters like I was.
One additional piece of advice, and this is less about which you're selecting, which writing sample you're selecting, but rather how to share your writing sample, is unless otherwise directed, include and it should be no more than a paragraph or two, a framing of what the project is, what you were setting out to do. So if it's a seminar paper and there was a prompt, make sure you're including the prompt. If it was your Leadership Alliance paper, include a little bit of overview around that project so that the person reading the writing sample has some context for it. And that way you also get to determine a little bit what success was. You know, if your project was, I was trying to use this particular methodology to illuminate this particular case, then they're going to read with that frame in mind.
And make sure you edit it. Make sure it is edited and free of grammatical errors. That is, I think, a significant annoyance for those that are reading those, and it is not to be underestimated, the impact that it will have on how your application is viewed if you have not edited your paper.
So, and Shemalori, I'm going to put you on the spot for this because you volunteered to be put on the spot for this. How often do students apply, and what's the process like of applying to a department different from what you majored in undergrad?
I would say it's actually, I wouldn't say people do it all the time, but I would say it's not uncommon at all. Like I would say it's pretty common, especially um, if you're doing something like, say, you're getting your degree in American Studies, or you're getting your, like, if you want a degree in American Studies, a lot of times you'll cross apply. I know people who were econ majors in undergrad and they applied to sociology or they applied to political science. It's really a function of the kind of research project you're doing. In terms of how to do it, I would say the most important thing I did when applying to English programs was having people who were in English, at least one person in English, write my letter to demonstrate that I was capable of knowing, like, of executing the requirements of the discipline, etc., etc. The one thing I do regret doing, if I do have a regret, is not being aware enough of my own work to see whether or not I needed to apply to a separate department. So in many ways, even though I didn't do work in multiple languages, like they often ask comp lit students to do, a lot of my approaches were more comparative literature based. So before applying to a different department, I would just make sure that that's the department you want to be in and that it's a good fit, because I feel like a lot of people think, oh, I want to do a really historical project, therefore I have to do history, where anthropology might actually be a better fit for you. So definitely talk with your advisors and see if it's a good fit still, if that makes sense. Um, because like I made a lot of assumptions about like what I had to do because I wanted to do majority English work that weren't necessarily correct. Um, but yeah, that would be my advice.
If I could just say, Will and Samantha, I sent you guys. Oh, you have the spreadsheet. Okay, thank you. If someone could share it. I could not attach it. I don't know why, so I sent it to you too.
So we have a question that came in the Q&A, and Renita, I'm about to pose it to everybody. So do leadership extracurriculars like being an RA, TA, orientation leader make you a more competitive candidate? Or is it best to focus all of your extracurriculars on research experience? Renita, do you want to jump in on this?
Yes, thank you. You kept me from typing. I was starting to answer.
About that.
No, it's actually good. It's like I don't have to send another email, so that's great. So I would say that it is not a criteria if we're just sort of looking at the baseline. It is not going to make or break your application as it relates to admission. So if you are a TA or if you're not a TA, if you are, that's great. If you're not, that's not going to harm you. Now, it part of your statement of purpose is really this narrative about who you are and why you have decided to pursue the particular field that you are pursuing. And if in fact being a TA, it's a TA or RA for a class. So I was sort of thinking of like something else, like orientation leaders is kind of where my mind went initially. So a teaching assistant, a research assistant, yes, that actually does help and support your application, and in such that it is part of the graduate student experience. So it shows your ability to perform some of the tasks, I would say, that graduate students perform. It is important. Your research experience is also important. It's about the full narrative that you are sharing about yourself and how did that TA experience contribute to your desire. Oftentimes, it is directly linked to why you decided to go to graduate school in the first place, because of that experience, because you want to teach, because you want to contribute to your field. And so it's really about connecting the why with your overall story. So it does enhance your application.
I'd very much like to second that. And add to it that if you perhaps came to the discipline late Maybe you took your first class in the discipline you're interested in as a junior, or it was your interest in this PhD is related to a practical experience that you had, an internship, something that you might think about, well, this is not the kind of thing that somebody who had been planning to do this all along, this is not how they would have done it, right? They wouldn't have started taking their classes in their junior year, or it wouldn't have been via an internship experience. Talking about that actually in your personal statement can make you a stronger applicant in many ways. Nobody in there has that. When you look back at the path, you see a winding road. And so talking about how a particular experience inspired you to do this research, to want to do this research, dovetails with your motivation, or being honest that, I hadn't gotten to this in my junior year. But I'm so excited, I'm so thrilled about it that I'm really pushing forward. That can enhance your application, actually, rather than trying to brush that kind of thing under the rug.
And, I would just like to sort of second that, because I also think, and I'm just going to sort of share this personal aspect because I think it's related and I think it helps students. When I was deciding to go to graduate school, I was initially going to go get a business degree, and that was the track that I was on. And then I ended up managing a campaign and working on a campaign. And from that experience is where I started to really get curious about many questions as it relates to politics. I was really concerned about engagement in the Black and Brown community, and really wanting to understand how policy impacted communities of color. And so that curiosity and that experience in work really was the impetus for my decision to pursue a PhD, because I wanted to learn more about these questions. And I sort of, learning that politics was the primary question was who gets what, when, and where. And so really understanding that and then wanting my community to understand that in a way, and wanting to understand why those connections weren't made. And so in any case, that was a part of my application. That was a part of the reason why I think I was admitted, to be quite honest, because they really understood my why, and they really, wanted to help support, my intellectual sort of curiosity in this area. And I wanted to actually do impactful work beyond just answering the questions. So I think just sort of putting a pin in your point, Will, about the importance of that.
This relates to another question that was submitted, where the person who shared it said, my university doesn't offer a ton of courses in my discipline of interest. So this is also that same opportunity. You can focus on those real pivotal moments. If your personal statement is listing, I've taken this class, this class, this class, this class, and this class, and then this class, that's a pretty dry personal statement. And they can see, their transcript. They can see your transcript if you want to, but a PhD is a marathon. And so the why you are doing it, the why is really important. So we have, oh, go ahead now.
It's kind of delayed, but I just wanted to add to that, I have students usually who say, is it okay to go into a field that I didn't do my undergrad in? And usually the fields are much closer than they're imagining. So, for example, I was an undergrad, we didn't have comparative literature at my university, but I really wanted to be a comparatist. And I majored in a few other areas and kind of made up my own comparative literature. And I made sure my writing sample was a comparative project. But it was okay that I didn't get a bachelor's in that. And I will, I saw someone enter my PhD program in comparative literature who came from a bachelor's where they studied wildlife fisheries. People make transitions, and as long as they again, have some engagement and their letters can speak to their analytical abilities, they can usually make that transition pretty well. You know, if you have no training whatsoever in literature, like, yes, you might want to do a master's to make a transition more feasible. But in general, like if you're going from, let's say, women's studies to sociology or something like that, like those transitions are not so as wide as they seem when you're an undergrad. And like I think Dr. Ray pointed out, you will do 2 years of coursework at the beginning of your PhD, where you will help define your interests and gain a lot more specialization. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. Like if you're going from English to, you know, French to English, or comp lit to history or something, or, you know, so like those aren't giant discipline changes where you can't make the jump from BA to PhD.
So we've seen a couple of questions relating to the GRE come in, particularly as more and more schools get rid of it. What would you advise students to do in terms of preparing for the GRE, taking the GRE? How much should students invest in that process, that exam? Pat, I'm going to put, oh, no, she just got up.
Can I jump in, Will?
Natalie, please.
So just officially, Hopkins no longer does any GRE prep with our summer students. Just so many programs have dropped it as a requirement. When I applied to graduate school, and I started graduate school in like 2009 or something, which you know is 100 years ago, I didn't even need the GRE. So like I would say it's honestly like fairly irrelevant at this point. You can go take a look, and I would search like, you know, Princeton English GRE and see if it's required. This is my personal advice. I don't think a good student with a great GPA should bother spending that much time on the GRE. If you feel like your academic transcript is not the best portrait of you, the GRE may help round you out, but they dropped off the subject tests at this point. Like it's not really a big deal. I wouldn't worry about it, and I wouldn't generally put much time into it. And half the schools you're looking at, probably most of the schools at this point, are not going to require it.
So I piggybacked on your response, Natalie. Penn is still, we're about 60-40. We still have programs that are requiring it. And it increases every year that people are dropping out or making it optional, but it's still several, mostly our humanities and social science programs. They're the ones that are still requiring it. So you really have to, you know, look to see, like you said, do a search.
Yes, I would agree with Pat for, you know, I think COVID, many institutions dropped the requirement altogether. Right. So it'll be interesting to see where the direction that it moves in this year in terms of programs that may or may not continue making it optional. I think it is most of our hope that it will drop off in significant numbers continually. But I would also say, but I do share a lot of Natalie's sentiments as it relates to the GRE in terms of it is certainly not an indicator of your success in graduate school. But there are some programs that hold on to it and really consider that it is a marker, particularly for programs that have a lot of applications for their departments. But aside from that, I would say for the social sciences, one indicator or a strong, I guess, indicator for departments that they look at very closely is your statistical training, because increasingly, like politics and economics and sociology, while some of them have these qualitative aspects to the research, there are many quantitative aspects. And so it would depend on the program. And so some of them are looking at those math GRE scores if they're still accepting those programs, but they also are looking at your coursework and to see if you have, you know, they use that as an indicator, is like, are they going to be able to handle our statistical sequence? And that is there's a huge barometer for some admissions for some programs. So I just wanted to note that. For the humanities, of course, that's not the case.
So an important conversation that every applicant to graduate school has or has to have is that conversation where they ask for a letter of recommendation. How do you go about doing that? And how do you identify the sort of the right people to write those letters for you? Shemilore, I'll put you on the spot.
Okay, this is actually a funny, well, it's not very, well, I find it funny now. It was not very funny at the time. In that I was actually in a situation where one of my letter writers, one of the people who I planned to be my letter writers, and there are certain people I feel like who it's not unusual they would be your letter writer. So this individual was my major advisor and had been my major advisor since sophomore year and was formerly my thesis advisor. So it's not unusual that I would ask them to write a letter writer, but one of them basically disappeared from the university without telling anybody right before I applied. And was completely unreachable. So I would say the first thing for letter writers is to ask them very early, because sometimes people will be going on leave and you're not aware. And also just because asking someone like in October is tacky, but also just overwhelming. The same thing as Natalie was saying with emails, that they get a lot of recommendation requests right in the fall, because it's not just graduate school applications, it's also fellowship applications.
Right.
All of these, like a lot of applications pile up in the fall. So asking them early, asking them for a strong letter of recommendation, because one of the worst things that I've heard about graduate school is that people will write you tepid letters of recommendation, and you do not want that at all.
Yeah.
So frankly, asking them, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? I remember the person I asked in lieu of my original letter writer, actually, I didn't know as well, and I hadn't taken a class with her. I'd only worked kind of outside with her on some thesis research, and so she said, send me some materials, send me a CV, send me your writing sample, and send me your project statement for your thesis. And then I'll make a decision on whether or not I feel comfortable writing you a letter. And so often that's the kind of scenario you'll be in, especially because, like, as Dr. Miller mentioned, you want to focus on, you want to focus on having faculty, particularly I think tenure track faculty, write your recommendations. So often you might not be as close with, a faculty member as you are with a lecturer. And so asking the faculty member, can you write me a strong letter? Here's what I'm doing. And giving them as much material as possible is super important. Like letting them know, here's my statement of purpose. Here's what programs I'm applying to. It's actually it's a lot of process, because a lot of it is like putting in their emails to the applications. Interfolio is something else I think a lot of people do, where it's like, here's my recommendation, having them upload it to a particular site. Sorry, this is a really long response, but basically it's kind of like 15 steps, but the most important thing is to ask early, ask politely. I think this will be true now that COVID is kind of declining, so to speak. Ask in person is another thing that I see. I feel like a lot of people miss. People prefer not to be asked over email. They prefer to be asked in person at their office hours a lot of times. And then after you ask them to write your letters of recommendation, tell them thank you, whether electronically or with like a physical. I know I think I gave my letter writers physical cards. Like, tell them thank you, because often the people who write your letters in undergrad, you may need them to write letters in the future. So one of the people who wrote my letter in undergrad, Michelle Elam, wrote my letter when I applied for the Ford this past year. So if I had ruined that relationship, it would have been very hard to ask her again. So those like considerations, which is a lot, which basically means start early. TLDR. So sorry for that really long response.
No, that was a lot of information, but it all was important. it's more than just putting down someone's name on the application. You know, you have to have someone that's going to be able to talk about what kind of a student you are and how would you fit at this institution. It's such a small group, you know, they all know each other in some way, and that could be the downfall of your application. And just, I love that you said sending thank you. That is so important because you never know down the road, you may need them again, you know? And it takes a lot of time and effort, and all the faculty that I work with complain like crazy about all the recommendations that they have to write. So make sure you remind them because they forget.
Those thank you notes,
Yes.
I keep the thank you notes. I've got a little full. They make the process so worth it.
That's exactly right.
And you know, it's not so much that, oh, somebody didn't send a thank you note, but when you do send a thank
It's
you
that they
note,
did. That's right.
it's such a wonderful touch.
I agree with that. Yep.
And keep
I have
people
all of
posted.
mine, every one that I've received from students. It
Mhm.
means so much.
It means a lot.
Yes.
And I actually want to extend something that Jim Mallory said, which is you can do this as a junior or even as a sophomore. Saying, I'm thinking, if you are seriously thinking of going to graduate school and you say, I'm really thinking of going to graduate school, I really love this class, I really love this area of research. When the time comes, I may want to, you know, ask you if you can write me, and Shemler said it, a strong letter of recommendation.
Sure.
Doing that will activate sort of they'll start remembering and filing away those wonderful conversations that you have. They'll be, oh yeah, someone's just going to ask me for a letter of recommendation, and I thought their contribution in this particular, you know, during this particular section of the course was really, you know, great, and I'm going to want to mention that. So saying that, and if somebody says, you know, I don't necessarily feel at this time that I can write you a strong letter of recommendation, you can always ask, okay, what can we do to put you in that position? Should I share more work? Should we work on something? You can turn this into less of a sort of, I'm asking you to do work for me, into a, how do I become how do I make you a mentor? And how do I become a mentee? How do we develop a relationship? So
it's the start of it. That's how you start building a relationship. There you go.
Yep.
Especially since for, I think, Leadership Alliance, at least when I applied, you had to have 2 letters of recommendation already. So to be clear, like, Professor Elam like wrote my letter of rec for leadership. Actually, honestly, she wrote my letter of rec when I applied for Mellon, and then she wrote my letter of rec for Leadership Alliance, and then she wrote my letter of rec again another 2 times. So like a lot of mentors that you kind of acquire in your sophomore and junior year, one of the things they know is if you're applying to graduate school, they know you're going to need multiple letters of recommendation down the line. And in a lot of ways, they'll expect it. So I remember when I went to meet with Professor Elam about applying to grad school in the fall of, I want to say 2018, she was like, oh, well, you have me as a letter writer. Who else are you asking? So like a lot of that is building up relationships with those people to the extent where they're not going to be surprised when you ask for a letter of recommendation. Like it's part of the process. It's really just about being polite and considerate. Just like logistically, because they're writing the letter about what they think of you. And also because you don't want someone writing a letter in like 30 minutes about you. It's not effective.
And just listen to your story of how many times you've had her write a letter for you, and she does it willingly, you know. So it worked.
And I just to piggyback on this about letter writers, because there was a question in the chat about do you just get one letter if you're applying to multiple schools? This was an easy one just to tack onto this, and that generally what happens is when you apply for each school, there is an auto-generated email that goes to your letter writer where they will upload the letter. And so they would need to, they may have to tweak it in some ways, but usually they don't have to tweak it aside from to the institution that they're addressing it to. And then you get the letter that way. And then, and I think one of the other points that was made that I just want to also emphasize is you want to make it as easy as possible for your letter writer. So you want to, when you make the request, like I generally have what I call a letter of recommendation request form. And it is very explicit about the things that I need to write you a good letter, which includes like your CV or your resume, as well as like, tell me about the program or what it is that you're trying to do. Like, you know, when you're getting so many requests, you need to know like, and if you've already written a statement, like I ask for the statement, like send me your purpose statement or your statement. And then I also say I need at least 3 weeks to write this letter, and also send me. So I have like this whole thing, you know, just so that students know, but I'm saying to you, as the requester, you want to do all of the work, so that when they sit down to write it, they have everything that they need to be able to do a really good job and write a really compelling letter on your behalf.
So we are just about out of time. Thank you all for joining us. I want to offer an opportunity just for any last parting words from each of you. So we'll start with you, Dr. Miller. Is there any last piece, parting statement, and then you
well, I guess my last piece is just, you know, my experience getting my PhD was one where I grew so much, and now I have this incredible job to support students going through this process. And, you know, it's not very often in your life where you will have this opportunity to research and discover and have the time to reflect on things that you're interested in intellectually. It's a wonderful time. It's very challenging. It's hard. You are going to have moments where you probably want to quit. That is all normal. I'm talking to you, Shimilari, and that has been your experience at some point. But just to encourage you in the process that it is worth it, and that we need you, we need your voice, we need your perspective in the field. So please move forward. And if you have questions, you can reach out to me. My email is renita.m@princeton.edu, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I'm gonna just simply say, just apply. I see so many students with self-doubt and insecurity, and just let the committee decide and just apply. Like, you guys can do it. You're already here because you're really top great students.
Right.
Like this is the best pool of students I could imagine are Leadership Alliance students.
Yeah. Reach out to any one of us that you have any questions. You know, we're here to help you. And do some research, do your research. Start now.
I would say, kind of following up on what has been said, I can't speak to someone who has finished as someone who's finished a PhD. I cannot speak to that, but I can speak to someone who's finished the application process very recently. Not only apply, but also be nice to yourself while applying. It's gonna feel very, very personal. I think that's one thing that like I did not anticipate before applying. It's going to feel really personal, more personal than undergrad, because it's more personal than saying, hi, like, my name is Shmalari and I like to read books. Like, it's like, this is my research, this is what I want to do with my life. And so it's going to feel like the end of the world when someone's like, oh, like, maybe we're not interested. But there are plenty of people who like apply twice and are doing fine. There are plenty of people who aren't going to like the universities they envisioned and they're doing fine. Like, I think like when I was applying my application cycle, I freaked out because out of 8 schools, I think I got 3 rejections, 2 waitlist offers, 2 master's offers, and like 1 PhD offer to Brown. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like, what am I gonna do now? Like, freaking out. But like when I got to Brown, it ended up being the institution I wanted to go to. I ended up being on fellowship, and I ended up having like 5 professors to work with in my department, which is pretty much unheard of, especially since I do African and Caribbean lit. Um, all of whom are very nice and do not fight with each other, which is also, I'm like, that's the really shocking part, is that they are very nice and they don't actually fight with each other. So like not having to worry about like putting together a dissertation committee, and that's not something before applying I ever would have thought of. Like, would you rather have 3 offers or would you rather have 1 offer? Like, I would much rather have this 1 offer than have offers at 3 places which are maybe like considered more prestigious in English, or like have bigger names, versus like the good work I'm able to do at Brown. So definitely like be chill. A lot of it is fit, but a lot of it is like, we got 2 early modernists last year. We don't have room for early modernists anymore. And so a lot of it doesn't have to do with the quality of your work at all. So not to take things personally, which is like ironic because, I continue to take things personally, but that's how you know it really means something. So that's what I would say.
I think
Mhm.
this note about fit, this is the note that I want to leave as the last one. That is the most important thing. So if you are tempted, and you will be tempted, to try and frame yourself in an inauthentic way in your application, don't do it. Because if you go to that school and they are expecting somebody who has a different set of interests from you, you'll be miserable. And because this is a marathon, you won't be able to finish. That's a recipe for not being able to, for hating your time there. So apply based on what you want to do. Now, you will want to frame yourself in a certain way. Think of yourself as a gemstone, and you want to turn yourself so that the facets that best catch the light are facing forward, but they're your facets, right? You want to highlight the aspects of yourself that really speak to you and your future as a scholar. But you don't want to do something that's inauthentic, because fit is the most important thing. And you're better off getting a rejection from a school that rejects the authentic application than you are getting accepted into a program where it's not going to be a good fit for you. So I think that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank again my esteemed colleagues on the panel. I want to thank all of you for sitting and listening to us. You're doing academia an incredible service by applying and by pushing forward. And so I want to thank you for putting that time and that effort in.